the trial of Karen Reed for the death of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, is underway.
There are 17 jurors, and they're coming and going with a police escort.
I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen anything like this. This case never ceases to amaze me.
The first week of testimony has come to an end.
It's a spectacle, that's for sure.
We really heard the defense highlight some of the discrepancies between what was documented and what first responders said they remembered.
There are a lot of issues in this case.
Proctor was improperly searching Karen Reed's cell phone for nude photos.
The fact that the investigation wasn't thorough provides a big wrinkle in the prosecution's case.
They're supposed to be creating this reasonable doubt, and they're doing exactly that.
Everybody wants to know, us included, why he wouldn't go inside that home on the night that the body was discovered.
There are more people here at the beginning of this than at the beginning of Johnny Depp's trial.
It's always the theories or stories that each side will put forth, right, for a jury to listen to and decide which one is more believable.
We asked Karen Reed about that alleged confession. Karen, did you ever say I hit him?
I did not.
The FBI is investigating an investigation of a murder. That never, ever happens.
Karen Reed was drunk and angry and hit and killed John O'Keefe when she gunned it in the snowstorm.
We're looking at arm injuries with scratches. We're not looking at tire tracks.
I did not kill John O'Keefe. I've never harmed a hair on John O'Keefe's head.
Defense attorneys learn in school, first class, the most important thing you can do is identify and select stupid juries.
We're not concerned about any of the witnesses. None of the Commonwealth's witnesses are concerning us.
Karen Reed is facing up to life in prison.
I just hope justice is served for either one, whatever it is, you know.
The fate of her life is not in her hands anymore. It's not in the hands of her attorneys. It's not in the hands of the prosecutor. It's in the hands of the jury now.
Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed!
The trial of Karen Reed has been turned over to the jury. Karen's fate is now in the hands of 12 total strangers as they deliberate and decide if they believe that she killed Officer John O'Keefe. The final week of the Commonwealth's case was all about the experts, as expected. These are some of the answers that we've been hoping to get. We've read the reports and we have analyzed what we had access to as part of public documents, but this is the chance for us to finally hear directly from the experts about what their opinions are and why we should rely on their opinions of how to interpret data or injuries or damage to the car and how it got there. Rather than go through each witness one by one and just summarize what they said, I want to walk through each of the issues that they're arguing and compare what they say versus what the experts from the defense say so that we can compare it. Because of that, the days of witnesses in order are going to kind of jump around a little bit here, but I feel like this is the best way to lay it out so that we can really try to understand both perspectives and see what we believe. But before we get to the experts, I want to skip forward and talk about the one witness that we heard from in the final week and a half who is not an expert or a doctor. A little context here. The prosecution wrapped up their case after the testimony of the investigators, Buchanan and Proctor, by calling in their data and phone experts, their crash reconstructionist, and their medical examiners. Lally called a total of 68 witnesses before finally resting their case. The defense asked the judge for a directed verdict after the prosecution rested. This is common to do in every trial, but it rarely actually is granted by a judge. A directed verdict is a ruling entered by a judge after determining that there's no legally sufficient evidentiary basis for a reasonable jury to reach a different conclusion. So basically, if the judge says that no reasonable jury could reach a conclusion of guilt, he or she can order the jury to return a specific verdict, awarding judgment to the defendant. So attorney Alan Jackson argued this for the defense. And Jackson says to find Karen Reed guilty, there must be evidence that the vehicle killed John O'Keefe. And he says that there has been no competent evidence presented in the Commonwealth's case that Karen's SUV actually struck John O'Keefe. Only conjecture and speculation. He explains the Commonwealth's theory and why he believes that it's unreasonable. And he says that Miss Reed is entitled to an acquittal based on that because no rational jury would ever unanimously agree with Trooper Paul, the crash reconstructionist. And we'll get to him in a little bit, and you can decide what you think. So Lally gets to give his argument, and he starts off with, "Not surprisingly, I would disagree." The "not surprisingly" comment landed him a quick scolding from the judge, but he continued his argument. He basically said Trooper Paul's theory and testimony is not the only thing that they have to go on, and he recapped everything that he felt was the evidence that made his case against Karen Read worthy of going to the jury. Like the shoe found nearby John O'Keefe and the video of him leaving Waterfall with a glass in his hand, microscopic pieces of taillight, the remainder of the taillight, and DNA, what he refers to as motive through the text messages and their arguments. And he says the testimony that claimed Karen said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And he says the data and medical evidence supports his case. Not surprisingly, the judge denied the defense's motion, and it's then time for the defense to present their case. Although we have heard 29 days of testimony through cross-examinations all about the Alberts and McCabe's and Proctor and the cover-up, and despite the defense having a very lengthy witness list as well, they only called a total of 6 witnesses over the course of 2 days before arresting. The very first witness they called, the one that we are going to discuss before we get to all the experts, is the snowplow driver, Lucky Laughlin. Brian Lucky Loughran grew up in Canton, so he knows the Alberts because he went to school with some of them when he was younger. When he was in his 20s, he began working for Chris Albert delivering pizzas, and he said that he did that for about 8 years until he got married. Lucky began working for Canton Department of Public Works, and he says that he was scheduled to plow the morning of January 29th, so he showed up for work around 2:15 a.m. Lucky drives a dump truck that has a nickname, and he explains this to the jury.
Is there one that's specifically assigned to you when you plow?
Yes.
And does that truck have any particular nickname?
Yes, it's called the Franken truck.
And why is it called the Franken truck?
It is a truck that has a lot of different parts than what it's required. It's not parts that were made for that specific truck.
An older one?
Yes. It was a truck that was very uncomfortable at the beginning to use, so they try to make it as comfortable as possible.
Lucky seems incredibly likable. He's soft-spoken, maybe a little nervous, and he comes across as just hardworking and honest, trying to give the best answers that he can when he's asked questions. Plus, who wouldn't love a Franken truck? Franken truck has air ride suspension, and the air seat is raised, so he says that he can see over the hood about 5 feet. And it has marking lights that he says he uses to plow. They're situated at the corners of the truck, up high, so it illuminates really well. Lucky says it gives off an enormous amount of light, almost like driving with a spotlight. Lucky goes over his route and what he saw that morning. Now, if you need a visual for this, there are some on the website, 13thjurorpodcast.com, but I'll try to describe it for you if you're unable to look right now. Fairview Road goes north and south. It ends at Cedar Crest on the north end and Chapman Street on the south end. 34 Fairview is at the north end of the street, just a couple of houses from the end. If you're looking at a map or if you're going north, it's on the left. Cedar Crest, which is at the north, is shaped like a big V, and Fairview intersects it almost right at the bend, making this two-street combination kind of look like a big Y. At the south end of Fairview, at the very bottom of this Y, Fairview dead ends onto Chapman Street. So Lucky describes his route for the jury. He first does Cedar Crest, the big V-shaped road, and he starts from the left side, if you're looking at the map, and at the very end, he gets to the cul-de-sac and then comes back down. When he gets to that bend in the road, he turns right onto Fairview, and the Alberts house is on his right. Lucky knows this house as the Alberts house because he grew up in Canton, just like he knows some of the other homes and homeowners on this route as well. He said that by the time he passed by this house, it was about 2:45 a.m. He says that his focus was in front of him and to the sides. And actually, when attorney David Yannetti asked Lucky why he would focus to the sides, the answer that Lucky gave was my favorite answer of any answer ever given in a trial that I've ever watched.
Where is your attention focused, sir?
My attention's focused in front of me and then to the sides.
Why would your attention be focused to the sides?
I am trying to be aware of any side traffic, any pedestrians, and, God forbid, any animals.
It's the God forbid any animals for me. Favorite answer ever. So, as he's focused to the front and the sides, he looks out and he says that he can clearly see the yard at 34 Fairview. Lucky says with the lights, the yard was illuminated so that he could see almost to the front steps. He's watching to make sure that there are no animals, pedestrians, nobody coming out of driveways, etc. And Yannetti asks him at 2:45 what he saw when he passed by the area where the flagpole is. He simply said, "I saw nothing." Once he passed Fairview, he drove down to Chapman, where Fairview ends, and turned left to do a 3-point turn, and then came back up Fairview Road, starting from the bottom of that Y shape going north. So this time, Fairview Road, the house, is on his left, and he said that, again, the lights illuminated everything around there, and he saw nothing and no one in the yard. Now, the first pass was around 2:45, and the second just minutes after that. Lucky estimates that it took him around 45 minutes to run the rest of his route and then make it back to Fairview Road, going the same way that he did before. He said it was around 3:15, maybe 3:30, when he got there the second time.
What, if anything, unusual did you see at that point?
At that point, I saw a Ford Edge on the side of the road.
Where was it parked on the side of the road?
In front of the Alberts house.
Where in front of the Alberts house?
By the flagpole.
And why was that unusual?
The Alberts never had cars that were parked out front, and it just stuck out as weird.
So imagine you're on the jury. You've heard from the defense that Karen Reed was framed, and you've watched as the investigators explain how they botched this investigation. And then you've heard from the witnesses how they rehomed their dog, and they rehomed their phones, and they rehomed their home. And then you hear that everyone is butt dialing and butt answering and butt calling back. The times aren't always right, which isn't too weird for some of it because, as always, times are kind of estimates, except for when it's very specific, like everything happened at 12:10 a.m. And you've heard all of this stuff about a cover-up, and nobody saw John O'Keefe on the lawn when they were leaving, but none of them said that they were looking. Then you have a snowplow driver with spotlights on his truck who says that he was looking, and he said that there was no body there. Then, when he comes back, now there's a Ford Edge parked right there by the flagpole where John O'Keefe was found, about an hour after all of these butt dials and butt callbacks. It makes me wonder what their reactions were when they heard this. The only Ford Edge that has been mentioned in trial is Brian Alberts. So, are they thinking that he pulled out there where John's body was found? Are they thinking that it was someone else? Are they thinking that he was just confused? How would a Ford Edge be parked there and not see if John O'Keefe was laying right there? Also, a Ford Edge is very specific. This is something that Lally brings up on cross-examination, saying that the investigator suggested that to him and that he just agreed. But Lucky said no. He was firm that that is not what happened.
And on February 15th, 2022, when you had this meeting with Paul, you told him about 3:30 or 4 a.m. Is when you saw this Ford Edge on Cedar Crest, correct?
Correct.
Now, in fact, when you first spoke to this individual named Paul, you didn't tell him it was a Ford Edge, correct?
Nope. Told him it was a Ford Edge.
You didn't tell him first that it was a small SUV?
Nope. Told him it was a Ford Edge.
Do you remember at any time Paul taking you on the parking lot and showing you different vehicles and asking you if those vehicles matched what vehicle you saw?
No. He wanted to make sure that what I was telling him was accurate. So he showed me what was a Ford Edge. But I had already told him It was a Ford Edge.
So he brought you out to the parking lot at the skating rink that you were meeting at, specifically showed you a Ford Edge and asked you if that was the vehicle.
Correct.
Now, do you know sort of the difference between, if you were to see a Ford Edge at nighttime in a snowstorm, the difference between a Ford Edge and a Jeep Cherokee?
Yes.
What's the difference?
The taillights in the back.
What about it?
Ford Edges are more round. The whole back facade is a little bit more round. A Jeep Cherokee are more square.
I don't think that's the answer that Lally was expecting. Lucky was very specific about the details of the taillights of those cars and knowing the difference. Doesn't sound confused or mixed up at all. And from what the statements say, Lucky is exactly right. The affidavit from the defense investigator specifically said that Lucky told him that he saw a Ford Edge or something similar. So they went out to the parking lot and he had him positively identify a Ford Edge to make sure that that was the correct car. Lally also knows that Lucky is colorblind. This was mentioned in his interview with Proctor. So he asks him what color the SUV is, knowing that Lucky doesn't know.
Now, what color was this SUV that you saw?
I can't tell you that. I am colorblind.
Can you tell, I'm just curious, sir, as far as your color blindness, can you tell whether or not an object is dark or light just by looking at it? Or you can't tell at all?
I can see things that are light. I can see things that are dark. I can see true colors. I can't see shades of true colors.
And so from what you saw, was this light or dark?
Light.
Lally then goes on to ask Lucky about his statement that the Ford Edge was parked right where the body was. And he says that if he didn't see the body, he wouldn't have known where it was. Lucky said that he knew based on what was said in the media about where Officer O'Keefe was found. Lally pushes back on this, saying that he's basing this on something that did not come from his own personal knowledge. Now, this is kind of an ironic argument since the entire reconstruction of the crash scene is based on information that was given to Trooper Paul by someone who didn't have his own personal knowledge of it and didn't see it. But I digress. I mentioned in a previous episode that Canton has a parking ban in the winter months because of snow plowing. But like he said in a previous interview that he doesn't always call them in. If there's a car parked on the road and they aren't really in the way or he can get around them, he said that they don't usually bother having them towed. Yannetti asked Lucky if he called it in that this Ford Edge was in the road, and Lucky said he didn't. He said that he was being courteous to the Albert family. The car was facing the same direction as Lucky, pointing south, with the passenger door facing toward the house. Lucky said that as he passed by, he looked out and he didn't see John O'Keefe on the lawn. He said that he went to the end of the road and then turned around and came back. And approaching from the opposite direction, he said that he still didn't see anything in the yard. Lucky says he doesn't remember what time it was when he came back the third time. He guessed it was around 5:30. But when Yannetti asked him how long after the first time, he said it was about 3 hours later, which would have been actually closer to 6:15 instead of 5:30. And 6:15 makes sense because he said that when he came back at this time, he went down Fairview, and when he got back toward the Alberts house, the first responders were there and had blocked off the road, so he had to turn on a side street. Yannetti completed his questioning by bringing up the defense investigator approaching Lucky to speak to him about 2 weeks after John's death, and he points out that the state police, specifically Proctor and Buchanan, did not even speak to him until later in 2023. During cross, Lally brings up the basketball hoop that Lucky hit that night. Now, I brought this up in a previous episode. The arm that sticks out on the dump truck that he drives hit a basketball hoop. It's a freestanding basketball goal that was on one of the roads that morning, and Lucky called his supervisor to let him know. This isn't on the front of the truck. This is the arm on the truck that Lucky says is the body of the truck, and how the body is a different size than it was originally. Remember, this is Franken truck. There's all kinds of new stuff on here. He said that he underestimated how far out he needed to be so that it wouldn't hit it. Lucky says he doesn't remember what time this happened, and Lally says that he remembers what time all of these other things happened, but not this. which is a little bit of a stretch because we know that Lucky wasn't really very clear on the times of the other events. He was just more clear about the time in between. So they were then able to use that to form this timeline. Now, as far as timing goes, Lally brings up a report that he said is from a conversation that Lucky had in May of 2023, which would have been the FBI interview. Lally is asking Lucky about telling the feds that he went down Fairview at 12 a.m. and 2 a.m., and that he saw the car parked there around 1:30 or 2 in the morning, and that he saw cruisers blocking the road at 3:30 in the morning. Lucky looks and sounds genuinely confused when he brings this up, like this is the first time that he's heard these times being mentioned. And honestly, I was a little confused too, because that's the first time that I've heard those times mentioned. There are transcripts of his interview with state police, and there's a signed affidavit of his statement to the defense investigator from February of 2022. So there's one of these before this interview and one of these after this interview. And both of those mention Lucky going in and starting his route around 2:15. Nothing is ever mentioned about midnight. And obviously he wasn't scheduled at midnight, nor was there enough snow to plow at midnight. There's also nothing in either of those interviews about the roads being blocked off at 3:30. We don't have access to these reports like we do the others, but Lally repeats the times and asks Lucky if the report those times say are inaccurate. And Lucky says, yeah, that's not accurate. He says he didn't come in at that time. Lally uses these discrepancies in the report and compares them to the testimony that Lucky just gave. Now, I understand where he's going with this after the fact, but while he's throwing out a bunch of times, it doesn't seem to make sense and it's really hard to follow. Lally is trying to use the time discrepancies to suggest to the jury that Lucky didn't see a small Ford Edge at 3:30, that he really saw Karen's big SUV at 5. But this lost some of its effectiveness because of the unclear way that he presented it, but also because he had already tried to suggest earlier that the car that Lucky saw was actually John's Jeep Cherokee instead of a Ford Edge. And Lucky was again very specific about what he saw. Lucky was very clear, and Yannetti had him clarify on redirect that he never saw Karen Reed's SUV outside of Fairview that morning. Lally wants the jury to believe that Karen Reed did go to Fairview around 5:30 a.m. before she went to Jen McCabe's house. He goes back and forth with Lucky on the timeline because Lucky says that he was at Fairview at the time that this would be happening because he says that he can see the Albert's house from Cedar Crest. And he was plowing Cedar Crest at the time that Lally says that Karen went there, which would have been between 5 and 5:30, before she went to Jen McCabe's. His theory is that Karen went there and saw John in the yard. That's when she knew she hit him, or maybe she already knew she hit him, but she saw him in the yard and then went to Jen McCabe's. Lucky is adamant he knows he did not see her there. And like I said, he seems genuinely honest and trying to answer the questions the best that he can. It's hard to know how the jury will take his testimony, but people who are following along with the trial, specifically Karen Reed supporters, seem to really love him. Groups of people could even be seen outside of the courthouse and at the Canton Select Board meeting sporting T-shirts with 4-leaf clovers saying, "In Lucky we trust." One supporter said that the outpour of support for Lucky is because he was honest, even when he was being intimidated by a powerful family. And Lucky may be positive that Karen's SUV was not at Fairview that morning, but Lally doesn't give up. He also uses testimony from Lieutenant Tully and cell tower data to try to show the jury that Karen Reed did go there. We'll take a look at that next. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. This year has flown by. What's something that you're proud of in 2024? What's something that you still want to accomplish this year? When life is busy, it can tend to move really fast, and it's important to take a minute and celebrate your wins and make adjustments for the rest of the year. Therapy can actually help with that. It can help you take stock of the progress that you've made and set goals that you can achieve over the next 6 months. It's not just for people who have experienced major trauma or for those going through a hard time. It's helpful with everything from learning how to set boundaries to learning positive coping skills. If you're thinking about trying out therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's completely online, so it's designed to be convenient and flexible to work around your busy schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time, no additional charge. Take a moment. Visit BetterHelp.com/juror today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/juror. Lieutenant Brian Tully from Massachusetts State Police takes a stand on days 23 and 24. And through him, we hear about the CERT team search, which we'll discuss more in a little bit, and the retrieved video surveillance footage from Canton Library and Temple Beth Abraham on Washington Street. We also hear about the phone records associated with Karen Reed's phone. So I mentioned that Lally was seemingly trying to force Lucky's testimony into testimony that would help prove that Karen went to 34 Fairview before she went to Jen McCabe's that morning. During direct examination of Tully, Lally discusses the cell tower info and the surveillance footage to try to potentially corroborate this theory. I'm going to condense a lot of testimony and graphics into a short summary. The tower data isn't much help, and here's why. Tully shows the map of Google Earth, and I'll try to give you a very generalized visual if you're unable to look at the website. If you think of 4 main locations that we're talking about in kind of a tall rectangle shape, although it's a little wonky because the top right corner is higher, but to make it simple, just picture a tall rectangle. The northwest or top left corner is 34 Fairview Road. The corner below that on the bottom left is the waterfall. The corner to the right, the lower right corner, is John O'Keefe's house, and the top right corner is the McCabe's house. So Tully shows this map labeled at different times to show which towers Karen Reed's phone was pinging on. If you follow true crime or trials pretty closely, I'm sure that you already know that these towers aren't always the most accurate. There can be different things that will impact which one registers the phone activity, but they do at least give you an estimated area of where someone is and allow you to rule certain things out. So after leaving Waterfall, we know that Karen Reed drove John O'Keefe to Fairview Road. At 12:33 and 12:34, her phone hit on a cell tower that would be to the left of this rectangle, but kind of halfway between Fairview and Waterfall. Then it hit a tower just north of Fairview, 12:35 to 12:37. And then at 12:38, it hit one to the right of that, closer to that top right corner, the McCabe's house. Then from 12:39, it hits on the tower by John's house in that lower right corner, and it stays there until 5:08 the next morning, which is the time that we know that Karen left because of the Ring video. So basically, when you're looking at the map, we see her phone hitting on the towers that are on the upper half of the map until she gets back by John's house, and then hits the towers on the bottom part of the map. No surprises there. Now, to make this next part as simple as possible, we're going to just assume that the cars that are seen on video that they say are consistent with Karen Reed's SUV actually are her SUV so that I can make the timeline as clear as possible. So Karen leaves John's and she's seen on Ring video at 5:08. Security footage shows her going toward Waterfall at 5:11 a.m. and then away from Waterfall north toward Fairview or Jen's at 5:15. Her phone uses the tower by Waterfall at 5:16, and at 5:18, she's seen on the video at Temple Beth Abraham going northeast on Washington Street. So here's the thing. Lally believes that Karen hit John. He also believes that Karen knew that she hit John, and he believes that she went to Fairview Road and saw him there in the yard before she arrived at Jen McCabe's house. He says that she is seen on this video at 5:18 and that she doesn't get to Jen's until around 5:30, 5:35. And he says that it doesn't take that long if you go straight there. So that means to him that she went to Fairview first. But the direction that she's seen going at 5:18 is also the direction to Jen's house. Right past where she's seen on this camera, there's a turn that she can take to go to the left, up Dedham Street to Cedar Crest, and then Fairview. And that's actually the direction that she took the night before when she was driving there with John, even though we know that they said that she got lost and went that way. But regardless, that's the route that she took. But if she goes straight, instead of turning there, it takes her to Jen McCabe's house. Now, she's seen at 5:18, and then at 5:19, just 1 minute later, her phone pings on the tower near John's, which is back in the lower corner, in the lower right corner of this map. Now, 1 minute after that, it pings on the tower by Jen McCabe's house, back up on this upper right corner. So it stays there from 5:20 to 5:37. But when Lally is going over this with Lieutenant Tully, he shows the map, and you can see the tower on the map. It's basically on this north side of the map. The Fairview Road icon is sort of toward the middle, but over on the left side. And then the icons for Waterfall and John's house are toward the bottom. And he then shows the video of Karen's SUV from 12:17 or 12:18 that night when they were going to Fairview, and the Temple video sees them going in this direction, which, again, remember, they got lost. They went this way instead of going the way that was supposed to go by Bella's mom's house, etc. This is the way that they went, so it caught them on camera. Now, Lally shows the Temple video from the night before of them passing this way going to Fairview, and then the video of her passing this way, and he asks Tully if this is consistent with going to Fairview. All of this is incredibly misleading. He completely left Jen McCabe's house off of this map, and then showed the video to the jury of Karen driving to Fairview going that way, which he's obviously insinuating that she's driving to Fairview again, since it's the same camera and same direction. But he doesn't say that that's also the way to Jen McCabe's house. And he doesn't point out that the cell tower that is being used at this time, that he shows and makes it look like it's just the closest thing to Fairview, he doesn't show that that's actually much closer to Jen McCabe's house than it is Fairview, which is consistent with Karen's story, not his. And the other towers that were being utilized while they were at Fairview the night before were not being utilized at this time. And the map from 6:03 a.m. until 6:57 a.m., which are the times that we know for a fact that she was at Fairview, both of those are utilizing towers that were used the night before as well. Those ones that are to the left and north of Fairview Roadhouse. So while she's at Fairview, we know she's at Fairview, the towers that are being used are not being used at this time that he is saying that she went back to Fairview. And not once during that time that she's at Fairview does her phone ever use that tower that's by Jen McCabe's house. So if you put all of that together, it actually debunks his theory that she went there first. But by leaving out information and leaving out different things from the map, he used this to try to show the jury that it supports rather than contradicts his theory. But leave it to Jackson. He doesn't miss a thing. Jackson gets up for cross-examination with his own map, and it does include the McCabe's house. And it also shows that the tower is about 2.4 miles from the Fairview Road house, but only about a mile from the McCabe's. Another map that Tully has is the cell phone azimuth, and the cell towers being used don't really tell us too much, but this map is actually based on cell tower triangulation, and that can sometimes tell us a little bit more. So each cell tower is split into 3 sectors, and depending on which sector is being utilized, you can often tell where the phone is located. It can kind of give you an estimated distance from the tower and the direction that the sector is facing. So the result that you have is kind of like a semicircle or an arch that lets you know that the phone is somewhere on this line. Now, again, Lally shows the map from 1217 or 1218 when Karen's SUV was seen going to Fairview. And again, the map from 518 when it was seen on the same video. Now, the arches are the same, which of course is expected since the video is seeing the car at the same place and going the same direction. So the arches are the same, and this is not surprising. And they do intersect with where the car was seen at this time on the video. But that doesn't really tell us a whole lot. So the final analysis on the cell tower data, it doesn't prove anything that the Commonwealth alleged. Aside from the cell records and tower data, there were some other things that were discussed in Tully's testimony. One was the search warrant, which he said that he didn't try for because he didn't think that they had probable cause. Jackson points out on cross-examination that a drinking glass that often comes from inside of a home was found by him, and also John wasn't wearing a jacket, which would make a lot of people assume that he had left it inside, and he was missing a shoe at the time. He also brings up that they didn't even ask if they could look around inside the house, and they didn't try for a warrant. Also, he says both Buchanan and Proctor both originally said that they thought that this was a physical altercation, which would have given reason to want to check inside the house. But he says he didn't. Another discussion was about the CERT search. So the CERT team took no notes to record what was found or what was happening. And Tully wrote a report memorializing the search on February 10th of 2022, although he says that he wrote the wrong date. The report also says that at 5:45, the CERT team located, quote, a piece of red plastic, end quote, that is consistent with the brake light material from a motor vehicle. It also lists John's shoe and at least a piece of clear plastic lens consistent with the lens of a motor vehicle. Now, this is a moment of going back and forth because once again, here we have another report that they're saying is wrong. But Tully's the one who wrote it. Here's Jackson during cross-examination with Tully.
Could you review that paragraph and tell me, after you review it, if that refreshes your recollection about exactly what you indicated was found by you and the CERT team on January 29th, 2022?
My recollection of what was located remains the same. I do see that the report states that it was a piece of clear plastic.
Okay. So, in fact, your report says that at approximately 17:45 hours, which is what time?
5:45 p.m.
The CERT team located, quote, a piece of red plastic, correct?
Yes.
And then it goes on to say it was consistent with brake light material from a motor vehicle, right?
Yes.
And if you look down a couple of other sentences, you talk about the shoe that was then recovered, correct?
Yes.
Then if you look at the second to the last sentence, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle was located, correct?
Yeah, the quote is a second piece of red plastic. Yes.
Well, actually, the sentence before that, sentence just above that, starting with a few feet south.
Yes.
It reads, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic.
That's not what it says. Would you like me to read it?
Oh, I'm reading it. Sure, read it.
Okay. The sentence is several feet south of the clear plastic.
Lieutenant Tully.
Sorry.
The sentence above that. Before that.
A few feet south of the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle was located.
Right. So in your lexicon, a piece means singular, does it not?
Yes.
If you meant pieces, you would have written pieces. You're educated, correct?
Allegedly.
So clearly, from this report that was memorialized on February 10th, you indicated that a piece of clear plastic was located consistent with clear lens from a motor vehicle, right?
That's what it says.
Okay. Then, well, it's not just what it says, it's what you wrote.
Correct.
Correct. Then the next sentence, which is the sentence you were about to read, go ahead and read that for me as well.
Several feet south of the clear plastic, a second piece of red plastic was located.
Okay. Simple math. According to your report on February 10th, a piece of red plastic was found first. Then a piece of clear plastic was found. Then a piece of red plastic was found thereafter, correct? According to that report.
Yes.
Then you go on in the following paragraph to reiterate, just to clear up any doubt about what was found, and the last sentence reads, the sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence, correct? Is that what it says?
Yes.
Okay. Then yesterday, you were asked to open these 2 evidence envelopes, correct? The evidence bags. Those are the bags that you opened yesterday, correct?
Yes.
You indicated yesterday in front of the jury, you didn't indicate, you pulled out 2 pieces of clear plastic, did you not?
I did.
Okay. That was in bag, I want to say that was in bag 570. Why don't we do this? Can you please open bag 570 and just look inside?
Tully opens the bag and pulls out 2 pieces and another smaller piece from inside the bag and shows it to the jury. So there are actually 3 pieces in this bag. Jackson then has him open another, and there are 2 pieces in that bag. Jackson says that's 5 pieces of plastic, 3 red and 2 clear. And he asks Tully, where did these extra pieces come from?
My question, Lieutenant Tully, is where did the other pieces of plastic come from?
Be more specific? Which pieces?
Where did the extra 2 pieces of plastic come from in those evidence bags?
Well, it appears to me that small fragment I pulled out may have potentially come from the larger piece. The other,
just to clear that up, you believe, as you sit here, that smaller piece was broken off from one of the larger pieces?
I'm making a big assumption here at your request.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's what it appears to me by looking in the bag.
And by the way, Lieutenant, this isn't a trick question. I'm not asking you to assume anything. You were there, and you recovered the pieces. And you described recovering 3 items of evidence, correct?
No.
Didn't you just read in your report? I'll read it again, last sentence. The sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence.
That's 4. That's 4.
Sorry, I said items of evidence. Items of plastic. Let's leave the sneaker out of our discussion for the time being.
Okay.
You were the one that conducted the search, correct?
The search team conducted the search. I was present.
You analyzed the search.
Yes.
You were there photographing the things that were covered in the search.
Yes.
And ultimately, you were responsible for bagging those items up, correct?
Yes.
There are 5 items in that bag, or in those 2 bags, right? Just the plastic.
Correct.
And yet your report very clearly says there were 3 items of plastic evidence recovered at the scene, correct?
Yes.
So my question, once again, is where did the extra 2 items come from? The pieces of plastic.
Well, as memorialized on the bag, it says pieces of clear plastic. So I'll take the hit that my report does not properly memorialize it. But I would argue that the handwritten notes on the bag that are contemporaneous to the collection of the evidence would be more accurate, as is in my memory of 2 clear plastic things being collected. Now, as to the 3rd piece, again, I'm making an assumption, but it appears that that is a small piece that was separated from the other 2 pieces.
You don't know that that small piece separated from the other 2 by being broken off, do you?
No, I don't.
Just a guess on your part, right?
It's a guess. The bags were, out of our custody at the crime lab for a period of time. They had done an analysis. We did an evidence review with you, yourself, and the defense counsel on December 1st of last year, where we pulled all the evidence out. It was memorialized by your investigator, and it was put back in the bags.
You didn't see our investigator snapping pieces off the plastic, right?
He did not.
Okay.
So once again, either reports are wrong or evidence was somehow tampered with in a way that broke it. Either way, it looks bad again for the state police. Tully testified that the CERT team was made up of 7 members, and they were out there using shovels, going through the snow, looking for the missing shoe and whatever else they could find. There's a picture that's shown while Tully is testifying, and it's a piece of red plastic taillight, and it's kind of just laying on top of the snow. He says that this is the first piece of plastic that was found, and it was picked up by the CERT team, and then he told them to lay it on top of the snow so that they could take a picture of it to memorialize where it was found. Now, this is interesting because it was at 5:45, and he said that he went to Fairview around 5:30, but he also said that he responded from Canton PD. He actually dug his driveway out and went to Canton Police Department, talked to Chief Berkowitz, and then came from Canton Police Department to Fairview. And he said that he did that about 5:30. Now, this is about the same time that the tow truck with Karen's SUV was getting to the Sallyport, because it arrived about 5:30. So he apparently says that he just missed it. But when he's asked about where Buchanan and Proctor were while he was at Fairview Road doing this search, he said that they were following the tow truck from Dighton back to Canton Police Department. But at that point, they weren't following it. They were already there. They would have arrived about the time he was leaving. So if I were looking at this to argue it for the defense, I would say that that could potentially be a time when there could have been an opportunity to have taillight pieces that are then taken to Fairview, laid on top of the snow, and photographed. The problem with not having notes and not having anything from the other CERT team members to be able to memorialize any of this is that we're kind of just going on the photographs that are taken that aren't exactly giving us the most accurate picture of what was found and where. If I were arguing this for the prosecution, I would say that Tully says that he did not know how much taillight they were looking for, because he says that he did not see the car. Also, the piece that was found that's clear had what he referred to as dimples. He actually says that those are what caused the abrasion on John O'Keefe's arm, and it was also laying in the snow, and all of this was within a 5-foot area. This part was interesting because, once again, it seems like Lally is trying to use other witnesses to bring in testimony of their opinions on the injuries that John O'Keefe sustained, and to try to corroborate that these injuries could have come from this car or this taillight. So now let's get to the rest of the cell phone data. I'm going to skip the extra lengthy technical details of all of this because, honestly, we have 4 different cell phone experts giving different opinions on what it all means and why. And the technical information can be very long and tedious to break down. We heard from digital forensics examiner Jessica Hyde, decoding product manager from Celebrite Ian Whiffen, Trooper Gorino, and digital forensics expert Richard Green. Experts are going to give opinions to the jury that are based on knowledge and experience, testing, information, anything that gives them more insight into forming an opinion that can be helpful for the jury to better understand information or evidence given to them. But expert opinions are still opinions. They're open to interpretation, and the jury will decide how much weight to give to any experts that testify based on what they think is most reliable and why. So let's go through the main points that they testified to. Let's start with the infamous Google search from 227. Hearing about this search was one of the first things that caught my attention because I thought there's no logical reason that I could think of for somebody to be Googling that hours before John was found. The experts weighed in on this, and as expected, we had 2 different opinions. The 2 witnesses for the Commonwealth said that they believe that the search happened at 6:23 and 6:24, and the witness for the defense said that he stands by his testimony that it happened at or before 2:27. Jessica Hyde said that the Apple testimony shows that January 29th at 2:27 a.m. is the timestamp when the Google search was done, but she said that she did a lot of testing to find out what that means. She took a jailbroken iPhone to bypass security and monitor information as it came through. She basically was doing a bunch of testing on her Mac and her iPhone and getting back different timestamps, testing to see what she could do to get earlier timestamps to explain this search. Her final conclusion is that she believes that it was made after 6 a.m., and she said that it's very unlikely possibility that it was made at 2:27. Ian Whiffen said that he believes that the searches happened around that time also. Whiffen said that if Safari is minimized and it's operating in the background of your phone, then the timestamps are not updated And the searches that are done hours or even days later on the same tab can show a previous timestamp. He said that when Jen McCabe was on Wi-Fi looking at the sports information about the basketball team at 2:27, he said that hours later she used that same tab to look up the search for How Long to Die in the Cold. And that's why the search was logged with an older timestamp as well. Richard Green, however, the owner of United States Forensics, says that he does stand by his determination that the Google search happened at or before 2:27. He said it's inconsistent with iOS that the search from 2:27 would be the same search from 6:23 or 6:24. One thing that he says is that his testing was done with the exact phone and the exact iOS version that John O'Keefe was using. Whiffen did say that his testing was not done on that specific version of iOS. So Green says that that does make a difference. There's apparently 2 versions of Celebrite Analyzer, and one has been out and is generally the one that's used, and there's a newer version that operates different, giving different time results. Lally asked Richard Green on his cross-examination if he is aware that Celebrite has had to update this version because of misinterpretations of data. So when he testifies, he says that the How Long to Die search happened at or before 2:27, and the Google search was found in the WAL file where the data is stored temporarily before it's written onto the main database. And just because of how it works, he said that they will find a lot of the newest artifacts in that WAL file. So he said the search was in a deleted state, which is a term we've heard some of the others use as well. He said that he came to the conclusion that the search was done at 2:27 based on how this particular phone operates with that exact operating system and his comparison with other data from the phone. He said that he found a lot of other user-deleted artifacts in Jen's phone from the morning of January 29th. He also said that the previous affidavit that he gave with his opinions on the information, where he said that the How Long to Digest Food search was done as an intentional search, he said that further testing caused him to determine that it was actually an Apple-suggested search, which is consistent with what the other 2 experts said as well. Lally got pretty heated during cross and kept raising his voice. At one point, the judge even told him sternly, kind of knock it off, and it got kind of uncomfortable. Richard Green seems like kind of one of those really nice guys. He's a really nice witness, and so it was interesting to see the interactions between them because Lally, who is not usually quite so sassy, was getting loud, and the witness was kind of apologetic. When he talked about this specific search and his previous testimony on the affidavit being that it was an intentional search, he apologized for any issues that may have caused. I don't think it calmed Lally down any, though. There was too much to cover in one episode on the experts, even in a supersized episode. So the second part of this will be released next week. The Google search information, it's interesting, and it may or may not have an impact on reasonable doubt if a juror needs an alternate version of events to believe. But the Google search isn't what really matters here. It's whether or not Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her car and left him to die in the cold. One of the biggest questions that I've had from the start is how the injuries and the damage to the car could possibly line up. It doesn't make sense to me, and it never really has. On the next episode, you'll hear the experts. We're going to break down everything from the final witnesses, the location data, so that we can determine, what do you think? Did he really go into the house or did he not? The injuries. Are they consistent with an animal attack or are they consistent with being hit by a car? And the damage to the car. How did the taillight bust like that and there's only one small dent but nothing else? Next week, we're going to use the final experts and weave their information together to make the final case for each side and compare. For me, this was the moment that changed everything. Next week. My name is Brandy Churchwell, creator of 13th Juror Podcast. If you're enjoying it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with your friends. For more information, photos, and episode guides, visit our website at 13thjurorpodcast.com.